Just returned from New York about a week ago. I was there on the United Nations Security Council. And how can Russia be presiding over it? How can these people in very high chairs telling the world that they just don't have the mechanisms and the systems to stop it, no leverage? I mean, what it takes to stand up and walk out of the room? Do you need like a special legal counsel to have a piece of advice on that? If you're sitting on a table with an international thug at large that kills people and abducts children, what else do you need, for God's sake, to say, no, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to help you presiding over Jesus, Joseph, Mary, and the wee donkey, the Security Council of the United Nations. And I don't know how to answer your question, Cormac. Really, what I can, I'm doing what I can. I'm talking about it. I am trying to explain it to people. But I've met people on the streets, like I was talking to people on the streets, not like high chair politicians. And I've asked them, do you know anything about Ukraine? I said, Ukraine, is that Russia? Bated breath. Yeah. I mean, really? Yeah. No, it's not. But I mean, how can you explain that much to people who is that ignorant? So let me pass to my next question. Can an ordinary Ukrainian help and supply to the evidence base that is already gathered to help prove the Russian crime? What can we do? What can you suggest, maybe?
Well, look, I think it is ordinary Ukrainians who are working on a day-to-day basis, giving evidence to the office, to the team of the Prosecutor General and the people who are supporting the war crimes. So obviously the testimony of ordinary Ukrainian people who have seen these crimes, whether it's a missile strike on a shopping center or a school or a hospital, or whether it's the combination of rapes and murder of a family whose house is broken into, or whatever it is, obviously the Ukrainian people. But I really wonder, is there anything that the Ukrainian people need to do that they are not already doing?
Exactly.
The Ukrainian people, and it's not just the Ukrainian armed forces, because this is a citizen army. This is a volunteer army, unlike Russia's army made up of conscripts and criminals and very few professionals. This is a citizen army that has risen up. We were hearing before the war broke out for months and months the percentage of Ukrainian people who would be willing to take up arms to defend their country, and it was phenomenally high compared to any other country. We were hearing about the percentage of Ukrainian citizens who would be willing to resist in any other way, and it looks like that was not bluff. What we've seen over the last 20 months, the Ukrainian people have been absolutely magnificent. It was von Clausewitz, the great, I believe, Prussian general of the 19th century and great military strategist, who set out that there were three elements you needed to win a war. There was the political element, i.e., the government had to be firm. There was obviously the armed forces, your Air Force, your Navy, your army had to be in well, but none of this would work if the people weren't on side. And in Ukraine, I don't think we have seen a greater tripartite unity between those three elements of the state, the armed forces, the government, and the people who are and the people who both the armed forces and the government come out of. So, unless you can tell me something different, the Ukrainian people at every level, just by surviving, just by forbearing, just by doing everything they do, some fight, some carry out humanitarian, whatever the Ukrainian people do, the vast majority of them, I'm certainly not going to sit here from the comfort of my home in London and say the Ukrainian people can do more. But I'm sure the role, to go back to your question, the role in war crimes is that they will be the witnesses.
The witnesses, exactly.
They will be the witnesses, and I'm sure They are. But think, Henry. I'm lucky. I've never been, violated in that way or tortured or whatever. Or I've never had a person close to me raped or butchered or tortured or murdered or whatever. But since this war started and the stories started to come back to me from people I knew before, for a couple of weeks before Bucha, as to what was actually going on, and I've been haunted ever since by what that would be like if it was my partner, if it was my mother who passed away a couple of years ago, if it was my, I don't have any sisters, but very close women friends of mine who I care about dearly. If it was friends, I am tortured by how I would feel if that was, if I was that close. I'm as close that I have many Ukrainian friends, and I feel, as I've already said, that brings me closer to it. But, we must empathize. And what I would say to anybody listening on this, please empathize with the Ukrainian people. Imagine this happening in your country, your city, your town, your home. Imagine a Russian boot kicking down your front door when you're watching the television at night with your children and your wife or your husband. And imagine what happens after that.
Well, the people don't believe in that.
Europe,
they don't believe that this is possible. Cormac, I'm sorry for interrupting. I know that this is happening. I mean, sometimes I even push that feeling away. I'm not trying to be too empathic because this is so horrible. This is so... I don't have the words sometimes to explain what's going on. And it is hard to believe that it is going on right now in 2023 in the middle of Europe. And people say, Russia and Ukraine just must sit at the table and find a way to negotiate what? What are we negotiating? It is...
no, it's very, very simple. And I love to quote my great friend Alexei Mikheyev, who's now Ukraine's ambassador to Berlin. And Alexei said to me, it was probably in late February, maybe even within days of the war starting, he said, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. Yeah. We know that if there was a frozen war on the current lines, that Russia will take advantage of this. Because Russia is badly in need of a break. Russia is depleted. Russia is losing on the battlefield very, very badly. Russia needs a break. They need an opportunity to rebuild their ammunition stores. Look, in the last year, it's estimated that Russia fired, I think, 10 million artillery shells. They have the industrial capacity to produce 2.5 million a year. That's the figures I have been given. Russia is running out of ordnance. That's why they're scrabbling to tin pot dictators like North Korea and Iran to try and get weapons from these people. Russia desperately needs. We know that and please correct me if there's one example of this, every single international treaty that Russia has signed with Ukraine, Russia has broken.
I can't. Yes,
including, of course, the Budapest Memorandum.
That's the fact. It's a bad fact.
We know Russia. We know Russia. You and I know Russia can't be trusted. The Ukrainians know Russia can't be trusted. What I say to people in the West, they still need to see Russia more through the eyes of people in Ukraine, people in the Baltics, and people in other neighboring, maybe Finland also, and Denmark, people that have borders with Russia. Norway, not Denmark, as a border to the far north.
Well, in conclusion, I want to quote President Zelensky. I was there in the United Nations General Assembly, and I hear that his words, and he said, if you want to know whether Putin can be trusted, go ask Prigozhin about that. So it's as simple as that. My last question. If Russia were not at the table of the Security Council in the United Nations and accordingly did not have its veto power, do you think that UN policy would change?
I think it would be and I qualify this. I did not put myself forward as an expert on UN procedure. I think it would possibly be easier to get resolutions through, although there is also China to consider. And how would China vote on resolutions that were injurious to the Russian Federation? Now, we do know that China is kind of sitting on the fence at the moment and is not going all in with is it a no limits friendship or a no limits partnership they talk about? Because the one thing we know is that the one way of restraining China is showing absolute strength in Ukraine. But China, along with other despots, are watching very carefully how much resolve the West has. So, I think, to get back to your question, I think removing Russia would make resolutions easier. But what does the United Nations actually do in the security sphere beyond resolutions?
I don't know.
And it seems clear to me that the United Nations is or has become, but certainly is at the moment, toothless. Can I make a point about the United Nations? Because I thought about this. And as I said, I am not an expert on United Nations procedure. And I've had many discussions with people saying the United Nations is past its sell-by date. It should be scrapped. It should go the way of the old League of Nations between the First and Second World War. I don't believe this. The United Nations was one of the international institutions which rose up after 1945. It's part of what we call our rules-based order. It's part of that international rules-based order that the likes of Russia and her allies in China actually despise and want to see the downfall of. So it is imperfect. It's imperfect as our whole rules-based order is, because it's very easy to point out to mistakes that Britain has made and America has made and other countries have made. But we have something which is an ideal, it is a destination, it's imperfect, but together, and the United Nations is at the core of our rules-based order, it's given us the greatest period of peace, prosperity, and security that the world has ever known. So no, I do not believe the United Nations is past its sell-by date. I do believe the United Nations is badly in need of reform.
Exactly.
But I do believe, being ultimately an optimist and believing in the best in human nature, I do believe that the United Nations is an ideal that is worth, and it is a destination that is worth holding on to and pursuing.